some of your favorite horror comedies?
Man, I go back to Little Shop of Horrors a lot,
Okay.
especially with the original ending where the plants actually destroy the world. That's my favorite version of it. But like Ghostbusters was a big one for me. Certainly Beetlejuice and even like Pee-wee's Big Adventure and like that early weird Tim Burton stuff. David Lynch. But then I'm a history guy, so I Robert Weiss. Not a comedy, but The Haunting was a huge influence on this movie because I could feel it in the Imagineers who made the ride in 1968. I could feel them reaching for like, what are the common haunted house tropes? And so many of them come from The Haunting. So there was a lot of that going on in my view, in my in my little Airbnb that I was in. Trying to put the movie together.
I love that. That's awesome. What's a horror movie that you watched way too young? Because I feel like every horror fan has at least one where they're like, I shouldn't have watched that.
Wow, okay, I didn't know I wasn't alone in this. I saw Nightmare on Elm Street 2 at maybe 5 or 6.
Oh gosh, okay.
And it was amazing. First of all, I didn't understand that Freddy was the enemy. I was really I didn't, because I'm not processing like the story. Right. I see a guy in a cool hat with gloves. And then obviously people talk about this movie a lot about how, I guess, subtextually gay it is. I don't know if that is subtext. It felt like text to me.
Text.
Yeah, just like straight up text. But there was something about it that spoke to me in a way that I really couldn't explain at that time. Now I really understand why it spoke to me. But it was like so inappropriate for me to watch it, and I loved it. And I gobbled it up, and I saw all of the Nightmare on Elm Street movies way before it was suggested by the MPAA that I see. And I didn't even I would say horror movies didn't even really work on me growing up because I was so into them. It was just like being in a fantasy.
Yeah.
Is a fantasy tragic or comedic? It depends on which one we're talking about, but I love that stuff growing up.
Exactly. What would you recommend for like a young horror fan to watch too early? Like if you could like kind of mold it and be like, this is the movie that you watch when you're 4.
Oh, I don't want to get in trouble for that, but you know what? Some Never Ending Story is a really scary movie, and it really, like The Nothing. I remember being a kid and being like, because it's existential. It's like it's not jump scares, but you're really like thinking about the fabric of existence at an early age in that movie, and also of course like Return to Oz. I mean, that is like one of it's a kids movie that is horrifying, but also like intriguing, and I think pulls you in. So I would say those to be safe, but at the same time, I'm a big fan of watching things before you're supposed to, especially if it's horror, because it's fantasy. It's really fantasy, is what it is.
And it hits differently because you're thinking differently when you're a kid. So you're just like this wide open.
Yeah.
Book, you know what I mean?
You're not really dealing with killing per se. You're dealing with life and death in a fantasy world that doesn't quite translate to reality, especially when you're a kid. The larger implications of everything aren't clear to you. And so, I don't know, for me, it was a huge wellspring for my imagination. Like, I remember watching Nightmare on Elm Street in particular, and I would go to bed and I would really I would daydream about Freddy. This is really weird and telling, but these were the 2 movies that I lived for as a kid. I would daydream about Freddy and Pippi Longstockings, and they lived in a house in my imagination, and they do things together and go on adventures. And that's where my movie brain comes from, is laying awake, thinking about these fictional characters. And I didn't murder and death, and that wasn't even on my mind.
Right. That's the mashup I didn't know we needed. So I need you to make that like a Pee-wee's Playhouse thing, but it's Freddy and Pippi just on adventures.
Who owns them? Let's go.
Let's go. I'm gonna spend the rest of my day rabbit holing to find that out. And I'm gonna hit you up.
Yeah, that was the recipe when I was a little kid.
Yeah, amazing.